The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Leo Tolstoy. Chapter 2. The story of Ivan Ilyich's life was the simplest and most ordinary of stories, and the most terrible. Ivan Ilyich died at 45, a member of the Court of Appeal. He was the son of an official who had made in Petersburg, across various ministries and departments, the kind of career that carries men to a certain position, a position where it becomes perfectly clear that they are unfit for any real responsibility, and yet because of their long service and their rank, they cannot be dismissed. So invented fictitious posts are created for them, with salaries of 6,000 to 10,000 rubles that are anything but fictitious. And on those salaries they live to a ripe old age. Such a man was the Privy Councillor Ilya Efimovich Golovin, useless member of various useless institutions. He had 3 sons. Ivan Ilyich was the second. The eldest was making the same career as his father, only in a different ministry, and was already nearing the age in the service when the salary starts rolling in by sheer inertia. The third son was the failure. He had spoiled his chances in one post after another, and was now working on the railways. His father, his brothers, and especially their wives not only disliked meeting him, they didn't even remember he existed unless they absolutely had to. Their sister had married Baron Greff, a Petersburg official of the same stamp as her father. Ivan Ilyich was the pride of the family, as everyone said. He was not as cold and correct as the eldest brother, and not as hopeless as the youngest. He was the middle ground between them, an intelligent, lively, pleasant, and respectable man. He had studied at the law school together with his younger brother. The younger one never finished. He was expelled in the 5th class. Ivan Ilyich completed the course with credit. Already at law school he was what he would remain for the rest of his life, a capable man, cheerful, good-natured, and sociable, but strict in carrying out whatever he considered his duty, and his duty, he considered, was whatever the people in the highest places considered it to be. He was never a toady, not as a boy and not later as a man, but from his earliest years he was drawn to the highest placed people in society, the way a fly is drawn to the light. He picked up their habits and their views on life, and he formed friendly relations with them. All the passions of childhood and youth passed over him without leaving much of a mark. He gave way to sensuality and to vanity, and toward the end, in the senior classes, to liberal ideas, but always within certain limits that his instinct pointed out to him unerringly. At law school he had done things that at the time struck him as vile, things that filled him with disgust at himself even as he did them. Seeing that people of high standing did the same things and didn't consider them wrong, he didn't exactly decide they were good. He simply forgot them, and the memory of them didn't trouble him in the least. Ivan Ilyich graduated from law school with the 10th rank of the civil service and received money from his father for his outfit. He ordered his clothes at Sharmer's, hung on his watch chain a little medallion engraved Respice Affinum, looked to the end, said goodbye to the prince and to his tutor, dined with his classmates at Donon's, and then with a fashionable new trunk, linen, clothes, shaving kit and toilet things, and a traveling rug, all ordered and bought in the very best shops, he left for the provinces, to a post as official for special assignments under the governor, which his father had secured for him. In the provinces, Ivan Ilyich at once arranged for himself the same easy and pleasant life he had led at law school. He worked, he built his career, and at the same time he enjoyed himself pleasantly and respectably. Now and then his superiors sent him out to the country districts. He carried himself with dignity toward those above him and those below, and he carried out the assignments given to him, mostly involving religious dissenters, with a precision and an incorruptible honesty he couldn't help taking pride in. In official matters, despite his youth and his taste for light amusement, he was exceptionally reserved, formal, even severe, but in society he was often playful and witty, and always good-natured and proper. A thoroughly nice fellow, as the governor and his wife used to say, and in their house he was like one of the family. There was also in the provinces an affair with one of the ladies who threw herself at the elegant young lawyer. There was a milliner. There were drinking parties with visiting aides de camp, and trips to a certain street on the far edge of town after supper. There was a certain eagerness to please his chief, and even his chief's wife, but all of it carried such a high tone of respectability that none of it could be called by ugly names. It all fell under the heading of the French saying, "Youth must have its fling." It all went on with clean hands, in clean shirts, with French phrases, and above all in the very best society, which is to say, with the approval of the highest placed people. Ivan Ilyich served like this for 5 years, and then came a change. New judicial institutions were being introduced, new men were needed, and Ivan Ilyich became one of these new men. He was offered the post of examining magistrate, and he took it, even though it was in another province, and meant giving up his established connections and building new ones. His friends gave him a send-off. They had a group photograph taken, they presented him with a silver cigarette case, and he left for his new post. As examining magistrate, Ivan Ilyich was just as correct and respectable as before, just as good at separating his official duties from his private life, and just as skilled at inspiring general respect as he had been as an official for special assignments. And the work itself interested and attracted him far more than the old work had. In the old post, it had been pleasant to stroll in his elegant Charmer uniform past the trembling petitioners and the envious officials waiting for an audience, and walk straight into the chief's office to sit down with him over tea and a cigarette. But back then, few people had depended directly on his power. Only the district police chiefs and the dissenters when he was sent out on assignments. And he had loved treating such people who depended on him, courteously, almost as equals. He loved letting them feel that here he was, a man with the power to crush them, dealing with them simply, like a friend. There were few such people then. But now, as examining magistrate, Ivan Ilyich felt that everyone, absolutely everyone, even the most important and self-satisfied of men, was in his hands. He had only to write certain words on a sheet of paper with an official heading, and this or that important, self-satisfied man would be brought before him as a defendant or a witness, and if Ivan Ilyich chose not to let him sit down, the man would stand there and answer his questions. Ivan Ilyich never abused this power. On the contrary, he tried to soften its expression, but the consciousness of that power and the possibility of softening it made up the main interest and attraction of his new post. As for the work itself, the investigations, Ivan Ilyich very quickly mastered the art of setting aside everything that didn't concern the official side of a case, and of putting even the most complicated case into a form in which it appeared on paper only in its externals, with his personal opinion completely excluded, and above all, every required formality observed. This kind of work was new, and he was one of the first men to work out in practice how the statutes of 1864 were to be applied. Moving to the new town as examining magistrate, Ivan Ilyich made new acquaintances and new connections, set himself up in a new way, and adopted a somewhat different tone. He kept a certain dignified distance from the provincial authorities, chose his circle among the best of the legal world and the wealthy gentry living in the town, and took up a tone of mild dissatisfaction with the government, of moderate liberalism, of civilized public spirit. And with all that, without changing the elegance of his dress in the slightest, Ivan Ilyich in his new post stopped shaving his chin and gave his beard the freedom to grow where it pleased. Life in the new town also arranged itself very pleasantly. The local society, with its grumbling against the governor, was friendly and close-knit. The salary was larger, and no small pleasure was added to life by whist, which Ivan Ilyich now took up. He had a gift for cards. He played cheerfully, calculated quickly, and played with great finesse, so that on the whole he always came out ahead. After 2 years of service in the new town, Ivan Ilyich met his future wife. Praskovia Fyodorovna Mikhail was the most attractive, intelligent, and brilliant girl in the circle Ivan Ilyich moved in. Among the other amusements and distractions from a magistrate's labors, Ivan Ilyich struck up a playful, light-hearted relationship with Praskovia Fyodorovna. As an official for special assignments, Ivan Ilyich had danced as a matter of course. As examining magistrate, he danced only as an exception. He danced now in this spirit. I may serve under the new institutions, and I may hold the 5th rank, but when it comes to dancing, I can prove I do it better than most. So from time to time, at the end of an evening, he danced with Praskovia Fyodorovna, and it was mainly during those dances that he conquered her. She fell in love with him. Ivan Ilyich had no clear, definite intention of marrying, but when the girl fell in love with him, he put the question to himself. Well, really, why shouldn't I marry? He said to himself. Praskovia Fyodorovna came from a good, noble family. She was not bad looking, and there was a little money. Ivan Ilyich could have counted on a more brilliant match, but this was a good match too. He had his salary, she, he hoped, would bring in as much again, good family connections, and she was a sweet, pretty, thoroughly decent woman. To say that Ivan Ilyich married because he loved his bride and found in her someone who shared his views on life would be as untrue as to say he married because his social circle approved of the match. Ivan Ilyich married for both reasons. He was doing something pleasant for himself in acquiring such a wife, and at the same time, he was doing what the most highly placed people considered right. And Ivan Ilyich got married. The wedding itself and the early days of married life, with their conjugal caresses, the new furniture, the new china, the new linen, went very well, right up until his wife's pregnancy. Ivan Ilyich was already beginning to think that marriage would not disturb that easy, pleasant, cheerful life, always respectable and always approved by society, which he considered the natural character of life in general. If anything, marriage would deepen it. But then, in the first months of his wife's pregnancy, something new appeared, something unexpected, unpleasant, oppressive and unseemly, something that could not have been foreseen and could not be shaken off. His wife, without any provocation, as it seemed to Ivan Ilyich, out of pure caprice, as he put it to himself, began to disrupt the pleasantness and propriety of life. She grew jealous of him without cause, demanded that he dote on her, found fault with everything, and made ugly, coarse scenes. At first Ivan Ilyich hoped to escape the unpleasantness of the situation with the same easy, respectable approach to life that had rescued him before. He tried ignoring his wife's moods and went on living lightly and pleasantly as before. He invited friends over for cards, and he tried going out to his club or to see friends. But one day his wife turned on him with such energy, cursing him in such coarse language, and she kept up the abuse so stubbornly every time he failed to meet her demands, that her intention was plain. She would not stop until he gave in, until he stayed home and was as miserable as she was. Ivan Ilyich was horrified. He understood that married life, at least with his wife, did not always serve the pleasantness and propriety of life. On the contrary, it often wrecked them, and so it was necessary to wall himself off from these disruptions. And Ivan Ilyich began looking for ways to do it. His work was the one thing that impressed Praskovia Fyodorovna, and through his work and the duties that came with it, Ivan Ilyich took up the fight with his wife, fencing off his own independent world. With the birth of the child, the attempts at nursing and the various failures along the way, and the illnesses, real and imagined, of child and mother, in which his sympathy was demanded but where he could understand nothing at all, Ivan Ilyich's need to fence off a world of his own outside the family became even more pressing. As his wife grew more irritable and demanding, Ivan Ilyich shifted the center of gravity of his life more and more into his work. He came to love his work more, and he became more ambitious than he had been before. Very soon, no more than a year after the wedding, Ivan Ilyich understood that married life, while offering certain conveniences, is in fact a very complicated and difficult business, and that to do one's duty by it, that is, to lead a respectable life that society approves of, one has to work out a definite attitude toward it, just as one does toward one's job. And Ivan Ilyich worked out such an attitude toward married life. He asked of family life only the comforts it could actually give him: dinner at home, a wife to run the house, a bed, and above all that propriety of outward form that public opinion required. For the rest, he looked for cheerful pleasantness, and if he found it, he was very grateful. If he met resistance and grumbling instead, he retreated at once into the separate world of work he had fenced off for himself, and found his pleasures there. Ivan Ilyich was valued as a good official, and after 3 years he was made assistant prosecutor. The new duties, their importance, the power to bring anyone to trial and put anyone in jail, the public speeches, and the success Ivan Ilyich had in all of it, all this drew him still more strongly to his work. More children came. His wife grew more and more querulous and bad-tempered, but the attitude Ivan Ilyich had worked out toward domestic life made him almost impervious to her grumbling. After 7 years of service in the same town, Ivan Ilyich was transferred to another province as public prosecutor. They moved, money was short, and his wife didn't like the new place. The salary was higher than before, but life was more expensive. On top of that, 2 of their children died, and so family life became still more unpleasant for Ivan Ilyich. Praskovia Fyodorovna blamed her husband for every misfortune in their new home. Most subjects of conversation between husband and wife, especially the children's upbringing, led onto ground where old quarrels lay buried, and the quarrels were ready to flare up at any moment. What remained were the rare spells when love flared up between them again, but they never lasted long. These were little islands where the two of them anchored for a while, before setting out again onto the sea of hidden hostility that showed itself in their estrangement from each other. This estrangement might have grieved Ivan Ilyich if he had believed things shouldn't be that way, but by now he accepted the situation not only as normal, but as the very goal of everything he did within the family. His goal was to free himself more and more from these unpleasantnesses, and to make them look harmless and respectable. He managed it by spending less and less time with his family, and when he had to be at home, he tried to protect his position with the presence of outsiders. But the main thing was that Ivan Ilyich had his work. The whole interest of life was concentrated for him in the official world, and that interest absorbed him. The consciousness of his power, the ability to ruin anyone he chose to ruin, the importance, even the outward dignity of his entrance into court and his meetings with subordinates, his success with superiors and subordinates alike, and above all his own mastery in handling cases which he could feel, all of it gladdened him, and together with conversations with colleagues, dinners, and whist, it filled his life. So that on the whole, Ivan Ilyich's life kept moving along as he believed it should, pleasantly and properly. He lived like that for another 7 years. The eldest daughter was already 16, another child had died, and there remained one boy, a schoolboy and a subject of dispute. Ivan Ilyich wanted to send him to the law school, but Praskovia Fyodorovna, to spite him, enrolled him in the high school. The daughter was educated at home and was growing up well. The boy's studies weren't going badly either.